Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Upgrades. I'm Jeremy Knoll.
And I'm John Suarez.
And in this episode, we're going to talk about the Land's Wrath deck, which is headed up by Obuun Muldaya Ancestor as the commander. So this is one of the two commander decks that they came out with for Zendikar Rising. And they said that there was only going to be 3 new cards in the deck. Everyone kind of speculated that that meant that there was going to be 3 new legendary creatures. That turned out to be not quite the case. So we do have the new face card, Obuun Muldaya Ancestor, and then 2 other new cards that are not in Zendikar Rising in each of these decks. The Obuun Muldaya Ancestor deck is actually focused a little bit around landfall more than anything else. With the other kinds of commander precons, we actually have the 3 different legendary creatures kind of pull you into 3 different ways. This one kind of keeps you centered around landfall with a little bit of a +1/+1 counters theme, but not really heavily like the other ones would, where it kind of really tries to pull you in those different directions. So
yeah, that's what I actually like about these a lot. They're, like you said, the normal Commander 2020, 2019, those products, they have multiple legends, multiple angles that the deck's going after. These are very focused. And surprisingly affordable and value out like crazy. There's so many good reprints in these.
I know that's one of the things I was going to bring up is just the decks themselves are just very solid decks.
Yep.
Like usually because the fact that there are 3 different commanders trying to kind of pull you into 3 slightly different directions, it really kind of waters down each one. But with these, with basically 2-ish, like 1.5, 1 3/4 maybe per deck, it really lets them focus on getting those cards that really care about those themes. And the cards that are in the decks are actually just really good. I think that it was really hard for me to cut cards from these decks this time.
I agree.
So the one we're looking at today is Naya. Obuun Muldaya Ancestor is 1 red, green, white for a 3/3 elf spirit. At the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target land you control becomes an XX elemental creature with trample and haste until end of turn, where X is Obuun's power, it's still a land, and landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So as I said before, it is a bit of a landfall theme. It does have a bit of a +1/+1 counters theme, and powering up Obuun is actually just like really good in the deck because it makes that extra land that has trample and haste get even bigger as you keep going. So,
yep.
To start us off, we both picked a couple of cards that are similar. I think the one right off the bat that we all kind of assumed was going to go into a landfall themed deck that I was a little bit surprised that it wasn't in this one already, but I can see why not just with the value that they already had in it, is Avenger of Zendikar. And this is one we both agreed on. It is relatively inexpensive now. It's not like super cheap, but it has definitely dropped in price because it's been reprinted a couple of times.
Yeah.
But really excellent card, gives you a bunch of plant tokens, gets those +1/+1 counters in that theme. Excellent landfall creature, really good high end. I don't know what else you want to say about the card itself.
You can just say it makes tokens of yourself. It's okay.
Yeah,
we know that's what you're wanting to get at, but it's okay. Yeah. No, the card's great. I mean, that's one of the most powerful landfall cards you can have in Commander. Like, it just floods the board, massive threat. The moment it comes into play, if you crack a fetch land or you cast a ramp spell, all of a sudden, everything is lethal, it seems like. So that card can end the game very, very quickly.
Yeah, in between Avenger of Zendikar and the other really big one, I would say, is Rampaging Baloths, which they already put in the deck.
Yep.
So you got your other really big high-end landfall creature that's 6/6 trampler, makes those extra creature, those 4/4 beast creature tokens just right off the bat. So really, really good. I think both of us were in total agreement with that one. Another one that we both picked is actually the next 2 that we both picked were from the new set from Zendikar Rising. Why don't you go over the next one?
Sure, yeah, I'm going to go over Morag, Fury of Akum. So this is a card that is absolutely busted. Something I definitely, I would bet the overwhelming majority of people who've read this card have read it incorrectly. Because it is a very confusing kind of card that doesn't seem that way. So it's 6 mana, 6/6 mythic rare, legendary Minotaur warrior. Each creature you control gets +1/+1 for each time it is attacked this turn.
+1/+0.
Oh, excuse me, +1/+0, yes, for each time it's attacked this turn. And then here's the tricky part, is the landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. At the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. Seems fairly simple. There's been a lot of relentless assault effects and multiple combat step taking cards printed millions of times, but this one doesn't give you that extra main phase like most of those do.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure you landfall in your second main phase with this card. Yes. Otherwise, it's going to get real awkward.
Yep, because when you play your land in your main phase, in your first main phase, it doesn't actually untap those creatures because they haven't attacked yet.
Correct.
So that first combat, that additional combat step is going to be the first combat step you have. You'll attack, and then your regular combat step will happen, and they won't untap.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to play your land second main with this, but the broken part of this card is that you're putting it into a landfall deck, right? You can cast, any kind of ramp spell in your second main phase and just get a second or a third or a fourth combat with this card, and it doesn't take much for you to kill your entire table. This card can just do that. Makes we just talked about Avenger of Zendikar. All of a sudden, even if you have those two cards out, the whole table's just dead.
Yeah,
all the plants are going to be getting +1/+0 from the lands from when you play it for Avenger, and then it'll get the attack bonus.
Yeah, not only do they get the +1/+1 counters from Avenger, they get the +1/+0 bonus from the Morag. Yeah, so really, really solid. It is. And again, like you said, just hold off until your second main phase, but you can play your Naya Panorama, which is in this deck. You can play any of those, like your Evolving Wilds or anything, Terramorphic Expanse. If you play, anything like that, you can go your Evolving Wilds, attack for your second combat phase. On your next main, then you get to sack that and do another one, and it just keeps going like that. So
yeah, you can play as many lands as possible in the second main phase, and you'll get those combats stacked up.
Yeah,
and that way they'll keep untapping and going. So the card is very, very powerful. I hope to get a chance to play it on Versus sometime, because very powerful card. I would love to try it out.
Yep, I think it's very, very solid. The next one that we both kind of agreed on was a new card that I think actually very easily replaces another card that's already in the deck, and that's Elidar Retreat. It's an enchantment for 3 and a white that has landfall, and it says whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you can choose to either make a 2/2 white cat beast creature token or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. They gain vigilance until end of turn.
Yeah, that card's obnoxious. It's absolutely obnoxious.
That card's absurd. It's just so good.
It is. It seems innocuous in that you're going to make little 2/2s, but then all of a sudden you play a panorama, like you said, and they're going to get +2/+2 counter, +1/+1 counters twice, and vigilance. They're going to crash in and be able to play defense. It's an obnoxious card. It's very, very powerful. That is easily the most powerful of the enchantment landfall cycle where you choose. I know in previous Zendikar they were uncommons and commons, but this card's obnoxious.
Yeah. So the one that we usually we're going to go over the cards that we're going to take out after we go over all the new cards. But the card that we would take out is Retreat to Ameri. At least I would, because it's basically just the original version. It's a little watered down. It's an uncommon. It has the same thing. It's a 3 and a white enchantment. Whenever land comes in, it's either put a 1/1 core ally token onto the battlefield, or creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. So not the +1/+1 counters, so that goes away. The only reason I could see really running Retreat to Emeria is if you also wanted to have a core or an ally sub theme of some sort, which is really good for that because it just spits out more and more allies. And if you're playing allies, super great. But otherwise, the Elidar Retreat just kind of takes over in that spot pretty much in every deck you're going to play it in.
100%.
So next card, we'll go to you. And this is kind of where we deviate a little bit.
It is. So I chose another new card from Zendikar Rising, card I'm very, very excited about, and that is Skeet Swarm. So this guy is pretty obnoxious. I know that it's supposed to be a nod to the Skeet mob from original Zendikar, but that is definitely not what's going on with it at all. So when you landfall with this creature, you get to make a 1/1 green insect. And if you control 6 or more lands, you make a copy of Skeet Swarm. That's obnoxious for a 3-mana 1/1. Like, all of a sudden, you're going to landfall, you're going to make you're going to have 6 lands because that's just what this deck's wanting to do. Your landfall, you're wanting to ramp, you're going to get there. And then all of a sudden, thankfully you're playing Paper Magic with this, so you won't break a program because you're going to make so many infinite copies of Skeet Swarm. I've got to play this card in Limited, and I tried to break Arena because that's an objective of mine anytime I can. And I would love to just litter an entire game of little insects everywhere. This card's just so great.
I definitely have in Arena in Constructed. I know this is a big part of Constructed, at least early on in the Zendikar Rising meta for Arena. This is definitely one of the cards outside of new Omnath and stuff like that, where if you mutate onto it, it becomes a copy of whatever you've mutated onto it. Yeah. So it gets out of hand real fast. And I've definitely gotten the message on Arena that says, please choose another game action. If you do this, the game will result in a draw. Yeah.
Yeah.
So super
you
obnoxious.
Mutate something crazy onto it.
Yeah, I've been doing Auspicious Sterix.
Okay. Yep.
That's
that's pretty sweet.
And the bounce shark, like anything, is real fun on that. But yeah, if you mutate onto it, super great. Even if you don't mutate onto it, just being able to like, okay, well now I've got my 6 lands, so now I've got a copy of it. And then I play another land. Now I've got 4 copies of it. Now I've got another land. Now I've got 8, and it just kind of keeps going.
Yeah, they're all 1/1s until you landfall with a Feldar Retreat out, and then they get the counter and Vigilance.
Yep. Super annoying.
Yeah, and, for sure.
Yeah. So the next one that I've got going is one that there's already a card in the new set that's kind of like this, which is really, really good. And that's Ancient Green Warden, which costs 6 mana, does double all your triggers for the landfall. But I feel like it's a little expensive right now. It's probably going to stay around there for Commander. But there's another option for being able to play lands from your graveyard, and that's Ramanap Excavator, which currently is only a couple of dollars, really.
Yeah, that card's cheap.
Yeah, it's like $8-ish right now.
Yeah.
So it's a 3 mana, 2 and a green, knock a cleric, 2/3, and then you can just play lands from your graveyard. So really, really solid. Lets you continue playing your things that are like if you have your, as we said, Terramorphic Expanse, your Evolving Wilds and things like that, again, that you've already sacked. And if you've got your other cards in there that let you play more than 1 land in a turn, things like Rites of Flourishing, which is in the deck, lets you play it right from there, go thin out your deck a little bit more, go get those extra landfall triggers. Very solid. So
yep.
Definitely suggested as a slightly more budget option for repeated landfall effects, because it's really just like this, the new Green Warden, and Crucible.
Yeah.
So
I'll go next. I have I'm gonna go over 2 cards because these are kind of cheaper, common cards I wanted to cover because the objective of this deck is still landfall, ramping, playing a bunch of lands. So I'm gonna cover the 2. They did give you a decent amount of ramp in this deck. You got Kodama's Reach. You got a decent Beanstalk Giant, and you got a couple of the creatures, and Fertilid, and Elvish Rejuvenator, and things like that. But I wanted to go ahead and add Cultivate and Primal Growth. 2 easily cheap 3 mana ramp spells. You know, this deck also has a bunch of just little guys laying around. Like I just mentioned, the Rejuvenator, the Fertilid, just little creatures, Satyr Wayfinder. So actually kicking the Primal Growth to get 3 lands is probably a pretty high possibility. And Cultivate is just a staple.
Especially if you can add in tokens from either of the other cards that we talked about.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So I think you want a little bit more ramp in this deck. I like to have, somewhere in the... Cultivate is just like a staple, right? They gave you Kodama's Reach. They didn't want to give you both, which I get. But I'm going to add it in there.
Yeah.
So
and Kodama's Reach is actually the slightly more expensive one.
It is, which is great.
Not super high, but it's nice because they added that in. It's functionally
it's like $1.50 more.
Yeah.
So not
very
unreasonable.
Solid. Very very nice of Wizards of the Coast.
For sure.
And of course you love Primal Growth because
I do.
That's
Plane Shift, any of those cards,
shift.
Man.
Yeah.
Love those cards. Love it.
Yeah.
Big fan.
That's an old school card there. So
it is. It's great.
My next one is not quite as old school, still has a newer border. But it's still definitely one I suggest you pick up for this deck, which is Mirror Entity. This is a very solid deck in pretty much, or very solid card in pretty much any deck where you can have a bunch of lands and be able to just dump mana into it. So it is a changeling, 2 and a white, 1/1. and you pay X until end of turn. Creatures you control get have base power XX and gain all creature types. This is very solid for the +1/+1 counter theme, especially because if your creature that you have is, say, a 0/1 plant token, and you put 5 mana into Mirror Entity, suddenly you've got a 5/6 plant token, and then all those counters add up onto it as well. So very, very solid card. It especially works well with any of the tokens that you're going to be creating in the deck, and all the +1/+1 counters help it out a lot. So highly suggest it. It's only a couple of dollars, so very solid.
It's also cute with Avenger of Zendikar because you make everything a plant, right?
Yep, everything's a plant. So my next one is in a similar vein. It's around the same time frame. It's Knight of the Reliquary. This is one that I really enjoyed when it was in Standard, for sure. It's 1 green white for a human knight, 2/2, and it says that it gets +1/+1 for each land card in your graveyard. Since you're going to be using those fetches to kind of, go through your deck a little bit more, it's really nice because it gets those bonuses. But it also has tap, sacrifice a forest or plains, search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. And it does say search your library for a land card, not just a basic land, which is one of the really big parts of that. If you can go get any of your ones that will allow you to, fetch again, if you can go get your Evolving Wilds, or if you get a different fetch land, if you get your Myriad Landscape or anything like that, that can go get those lands a little bit later, then, that's just an added bonus. And the next one, which I'll go over, which kind of works in the same vein as that, is actually going to be Gavin Township. This one is a land, which usually I don't suggest too many lands for this, but this one is add a colorless or 2 green white, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So it really helps to go get that one, and then you can start putting those extra +1/+1 counters on everything and really start going off with that theme, that sub theme of the deck. So
for sure. So my next card is it has landfall. The card may not have landfall written on it, but my next suggestion is Tireless Tracker. So 2 colorless and a green, Human Scout. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, also known as landfall, investigate. So you'll make a clue token. Clues. Green has a couple of ways to draw cards, not a ton, but clues are fantastic. They stick around. They're an artifact that you can sacrifice for either the card or for a various effect if somebody's trying to do something to you or they're trying to prevent something. And then this card just also has the ability of whenever you sacrifice a clue, it gets a +1/+1 counter. And that doesn't matter if you sacrificed it due to opponent making you do that or if you actually paid the 2 to sacrifice it to draw a card. But this is just one of the best green draw card engines, especially in a landfall deck. You're always going to have the clues. Even if it goes away, the clues are going to remain. They don't go away with him. Just the fantastic card.
Yeah, highly agree. That was definitely on my short list of cards that I was going to add into this. It is just like a tiny bit. It was like kind of getting over where I was trying to set my budget. So
sure,
I was trying to go with like a slightly cheaper. It is only like a $5 card, but I figured I already had the Morag and Avenger and some other stuff in there. I was trying to keep it a little bit lower than that if I could.
Yep. I was trying to debate a lot on like how I wanted to value some of these cards because we're filming this, we're still in spoiler area, so these cards have a little bit more value necessarily before they come out, and then they drop a little bit. But these are commander cards. A lot of them don't necessarily drop, so I didn't want to choose too many. So
highly understand that. Yeah. My next one is another old school card. This one's actually old school from Plane Chase as well. And this one is Forgotten Ancient. And it's 3 and a green for a 0/3. Whenever a player casts a spell, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Forgotten Ancient. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you may move any number of +1/+1 counters from Forgotten Ancient onto other creatures. It's super, super good on its own, just with any other creature on the board, because you can just make another creature that has trample or vigilance or something just into a big scary threat. But just adding it into the deck and then placing those counters on Obuun is just gets out of hand quick. And it's whenever anybody casts a spell. So if you can put this down on turn 3 or 4 and all of your opponents are like, well, I got to start doing my thing. They're not going to like hold back their spells just because this is on the board. By the time it gets back to you, it's already going to be like, you know, plus 3+1/+1 counters, maybe 4
minimum,
just on your first time. And then you put those right onto Obuun and gets out of hand fast. So
that was the very first you make the card that the community actually built online. And obviously at that point, Scourge, previous to Scourge even, because we were building it earlier, the commander wasn't a thing. Like that wasn't, this card was like highly thought of that it was going to be a standard player, never did, and then Commander comes around and it just finds a perfect home there.
Yeah, super, super great in Commander.
So my next card, I'm going to jump over to a similar card to Forgotten Ancient, not exactly as powerful with the ability of getting a +1/+1 counter every time someone plays a land, but I chose Undergrowth Champion. Colorless and a green, it's an elemental. If damage would be dealt to Undergrowth Champion while it has a +1/+1 counter on it, you can remove that +1/+1 counter and prevent all the damage dealt to him. So very, very hard to kill, especially in a landfall deck. And then it also has the landfall ability of whenever you play a land, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on him. So he will get big quick, and he will probably not die very often. So I like this card a lot. I like it with Obuun. Obviously, you landfall, you get to put the counter on Undergrowth Champion so that it'll just never die. So it'll get 2 +1/+1 counters, and you can get it out of hand pretty quickly. The theme of this deck in general is landfall and +1/+1 counters. So having a giant creature for 3 mana that just doesn't die is pretty sweet.
Yeah, and it's actually pretty surprising how inexpensive it is for it being
a mythic rare.
A mythic rare from a set where it wasn't like it was definitely a highly printed set because it was a Battle for Zendikar, but it wasn't like it was not a super like it didn't have like all the special editions and like collector's boosters at that point, which really have been driving prices down too. But yeah, like a $2 card.
Yep.
Really,
it's like right above bulk for a mythic rare. It's sweet.
Yeah, it's very, very nice for that. My next one is from a commander set. Speaking of very affordable, and it's Loyal Guardian, which is from the 2018 commander set, and it is an uncommon from that set. Which obviously these are precons, so the rarities are, but it's a 4/4 trampler for 5 mana, 4 and a green. Rhino, and it has Lieutenant at the beginning of your combat on your turn. If you control your commander, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So it doesn't have the landfall theme built into this one, but it does have, as long as you have your commander, works really, really well with it, because at the beginning of combat, you can stack it so that your counters will go on first, and then the Lieutenant, and then the Obuun will see, okay, well, now I can make a land that is XX, which is slightly bigger. I believe that's how that works.
That sounds right.
Because it goes with
at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, put a +1/+1 each counter you control.
Mm-hmm.
You get to stack them, so you'll stack Obuun first.
Yep.
And then
Loyal Guardian.
And then everything will get a +1/+1 counter first, and then Obuun will resolve.
And then Obuun will resolve, which will mean that
that sounds right.
Whatever
that
it is.
That sounds right, which means it's most certainly not right. So
because we're Commander Versus, and it's probably wrong. But yeah, even if you don't get that extra bonus, like you get it again the next turn, and plus it makes all your other creatures, as we said before, with if you're playing tokens or whatever else, it just makes them way better. Excuse me.
I'll let you finish off with your last card before I hit my last two.
All right. So my last one is another one which is not quite cultivate status, just because it's not as iconic as a ramp spell, but it's one that I really love, and that's Verdan Confluence. This is also from a commander set, Commander 2015. It was part of a cycle. Mystic was the one that got all of the the big hype around it.
But don't forget Fiery.
Fiery
was the most expensive by a long
Fire was really, really good for a long time. Yeah. But Verdan Confluence is a sorcery for 4 green, and then you can choose 3. So you can choose any mode more than once if you want. And it's got 3 modes. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. There's our theme. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So it's got a little Eternal Witness built into it. Yep. And search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So it can ramp you, it can put those +1/+1 counters on your creatures, or it can do the Eternal Witness, or all 3, whichever combination you want. Super solid card. I really enjoy this card a lot.
Very versatile, which is exactly what you want. And speaking of versatility, so my last 2 cards are both from the new set Zendikar Rising. This is, I believe, without a doubt, probably my favorite mechanic or thing that Wizards has done, which are the modal dual-faced cards. I think they nailed it. They knocked it out of the park with every single one of these. And the 2 that I would suggest putting in here, I didn't talk about the lands that flip, the rare ones. Those are obvious. There's plenty of lands that you can play in Commander, and you don't have to go out of your way to get the newest dual land. But the ones I was suggesting was Balagad Recovery, which is 2 colors and a green, and it's a regrowth. Pretty good. Just get a card out of your graveyard, right? And, if you happen to need a land, you can just flip it and play it tapped as a forest, basically. It's not a basic forest, but it taps for your green. Absolutely crazy. These cards are going to be so good for Commander. I think we're going to see multiple in pretty much every Commander deck, just as there's just no reason not to play some of these cards. And the other one I chose was Valakut Awakening, which is the rare instant. For some reason, this card's an instant. 2 colors and a red, discard your hand and then draw that many cards. Okay. Like, I don't quite understand why. One, why is it an instant, which doesn't make much sense to me. Like, those abilities, for the most part, have almost always been sorceries. But, very, very cheap right now. It can come into play as a mountain for when you do need a mountain rather than a draw spell. Pretty crazy. I just think this card is these cards are so good, and you get to play cards like the Karuz, Selesnya Sanctuary, Gruul Turf, so you can pick them up later in the game to get a spell out of your land pile. Like, that's mental magic. If you guys have ever played mental magic, where you put a card down and you want to cast Gush so that you get to pick up your face down cards to cast more spells, like, this is just it's not real. You're not supposed to be able to do this kind of thing. And I think they just absolutely killed it with that mechanic, and I think those cards are going to be played basically forever.
Yeah. The one thing that I am a little disappointed about Valakut Awakening, and this is just a personal thing, is it is put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library.
Oh, bottom, discard. Yes, sorry, not discard, yes. To be fair, that's probably what it needs to do.
It is, because that does make my Rael deck just not quite make my Rael deck, because it doesn't discard those cards.
Correct, yes. My mistake. Yes, it does not discard, because that would be actually obnoxious.
Yeah, it would
then
be
you would actually just be cheating. You just get to put things in your graveyard, return them from the graveyard, or draw double cards with Rael. Like, yes, it does put them on the bottom. It does do
instant
that.
Speed for 3 mana,
but instant speed. It's a Wheel of Fortune for you, but instant speed. So, pretty sweet.
So that is our overview of what we would put into our Land's Wrath deck. I think we're going to go over just real quick a couple cards that we would take out. As we said before, I think Retreat to Ameri is probably kind of an obvious one. For me, I'm also going to be taking out a couple of the cards that I think just don't quite go how I think that they would with the rest of the deck. One is Seer Sundial, which I really always want to work well. It seems like such a cool effect, but it just also seems like it slows you down. And if it, like, in green, it's probably fine. In white, it's really just kind of
There's a reason it's the budget Hornagreed, Jeremy.
It's true. It's a 4-mana artifact. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2 if you do draw a card.
Yeah, it's not great. It's, if I would advise getting a Hornagreed if you want that effect. That card's just substantially better than this. There are some cards where there's a budget version and it kind of fills the same role. This isn't it. Like, you got so many things you could be doing with your mana in this deck, with your commander and everything else. It just seems like that's a lost cause.
I always really want it to work better than it does.
Yeah.
So there's that. A couple other things were the Struggle to Survive.
I chose
Together
that as well.
Yeah, Together Forever, which I think we both also chose, which is just another enchantment that's...
Scare Tiller.
Yeah, Scare Tiller is also... that's another one that I was really excited when I first saw it. I was like, man, this seems like a really cool design. And it just never quite makes it to where I want it to be, because you have to tap. Like, if you're going to get something that lets you just tap it without having to attack, it's probably way, way better. But on its own, it's just kind of... as a 1/4,
Exactly.
I know I did Keeper of Fables.
Same.
Which, I think that one is
sweet
okay.
looking card, but just never works.
Yeah, it's going to be a little expensive at 5 mana, and whenever one or more non-human creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. It seems good. I'm sure it can be really good. I just don't quite think it's going to be as good as some of the other cards we picked, in keeping with the theme. I know I took out Cryptic Caves. I believe you did too. Yep. Yeah, I cut a land because I knew I had Gavin Township in there, but Cryptic Caves is another one where it's just kind of, it's okay. Sacrifice it, draw a card, like pay 1, sacrifice it, draw a card. If you have 5
doesn't
or more
excite
lands.
me.
Yeah,
just doesn't do it for me.
It would be okay if it was like a mono white deck, maybe. You know,
sure.
Here's sack a land, draw a card.
I cut Elite Scale Guard, which I think the card is actually fine. It's a 5 mana 2/3. Whenever a creature you control the +1/+1 counter attacks, it taps a creature that the defending player controls. Really, I just hate Bolster. And this card has Bolster too when it enters the battlefield. That's really, I saw that and I was like, no. I don't like Bolster. I don't like it. I don't like Fate Reforge, Dragon's Tongue here, all that. Like, this just, there are plenty of other things I can do rather than tap their creature, and that's what I want to do, is make my creatures just larger than theirs. I kept the things like Abzan Falconer, which gives it flying, or there's one that gives it trample. Those cards are fine, but I don't really need to tap your blocker. My creatures are probably going to be huge.
Yeah, they're fine. Another one I think we both agreed on was Sandstone Oracle.
Yep.
7 mana.
Love that card.
Yeah.
Don't love it here.
Yeah. Whenever it enters the battlefield, choose an opponent. If that player has more cards in hand than you, draw cards equal to the difference. If you're playing against a blue deck, there's a good chance that they're going to have more cards than you, but
I like this card when I can keep bringing it back.
Yeah. Definitely.
For value. That's where I like it. In a red, some sort of red, like Goblin Welder, Duretti kind of thing, or not here.
Yeah.
And I also cut, one of my favorite cards of all time, Yavimaya Elder for me, that card is just not it anymore. Like, I get it still draws you 2 basic lands when it dies, and you get to draw the card off of it when you sacrifice it for 2. But there's just so many things you could be doing with your mana nowadays. There's so many good ramp spells. And every time I see the card, it's always that new art, and I hate it. I hate the new art. If it was the old guy from Urza's Destiny, I think I'd be more inclined to keep it. But every time I see that card, it's that new frame and that like elk thing it's wearing. I don't like it.
Yeah, you're an old school elitist.
I am. I can't do it. Cannot do it.
Another one I took out was Spore Bound, which is fine. It's a 3/3 for 5. Whenever land enters the battlefield, you make another 1/1 green saproling creature token. But as I said, we've got a couple other token creators in the deck, and I just think this one gets a little outclassed by those. Like, if you're going to keep it stock, still just a very solid token creator card. But I think the other ones that I've put in are just a little bit better than it overall.
Yeah. And again, these decks, unlike the commander ones, like we mentioned, these decks are very focused. Like, you can choose the cards you want to take out, pretty much whatever cards you don't like for the most part. It's not like you're looking for cards in these decks that don't fit what you're trying to do. Like, this deck overall is the +1/+1 counter and the landfall. You don't have like a third or fourth theme of things that are just going on. So you can pretty much pick and choose the cards you don't want to be in there, which is nice.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
my last one was Nissa's Renewal, which I felt like had, a place in this deck, but for the most part gets outclassed by things like Verdan Confluence with being able to choose. It does let you, get those 3 basic lands and then gain the 7 life, which 7 life is pretty nice. But I think the ability to get stuff back from your graveyard or choose if you want to put +1/+1 counters on things, it just kind of makes it a little bit better. Being able to choose which ones you need at whichever time. The modal spells is always going to trump that for me.
Yep. Verdan Confluence is definitely a better card. It's just a matter of your budget, what you're looking to do, like what you need to buy when you want to buy it, what you want to upgrade. It's like I said, it's nice that all these cards are focused and they all sort of do the same thing. So upgrading pieces here and there, pretty easy.
All right, thank you so much for watching, and this has been our upgrades episode of the Land's Wrath deck from Zendikar Rising. Make sure to let us know what cards you would add to the deck in the comments, and also remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I'm Jeremy Knoll for John Suarez. Thank you for watching.